Rain stitched silver lines across the dark windows of Whitmore Manor, and within its candlelit halls the servants moved quietly, as if careful not to disturb the tension that had settled like dust upon the grand house. In a small chamber at the end of the upper corridor stood Eliza Whitmore, gazing into the mirror before her dressing table with the stillness of someone accustomed to measuring every breath. Her reflection, pale in the wavering candlelight, revealed a young woman of gentle bearing, her chestnut hair falling in soft waves down her back like autumn silk. There was nothing loud or commanding about her beauty. Rather, it possessed the quiet grace of something easily overlooked yet impossible to forget. Behind her, the door opened without warning. Lady Augusta Whitmore entered as though the room belonged more to her than to the girl who slept there. Her gown rustled like a blade drawn from its sheath, and the scent of lavender followed her with an authority that made the air feel colder. Her eyes, sharp and pale as winter glass, moved slowly across Eliza's reflection. "So," Lady Augusta said with a faint curl of disdain, "the servants were not exaggerating. You truly intended to attend the Duke's ball tomorrow." Eliza turned slowly, folding her hands before her as she had been taught to do whenever her stepmother spoke. "The invitation arrived in Father's name," she answered softly. "It seemed improper not to appear." Lady Augusta gave a small laugh that contained no humor. "Improper? My dear girl, impropriety would be allowing you to parade yourself before society like some hidden jewel." Eliza lowered her gaze, though the remark settled in her chest like a bruise. For years she had learned that silence was the safest reply to cruelty disguised as refinement. From the corridor came a lighter voice. "Mother, is she truly planning to come?" Clara Whitmore entered the room with the delicate impatience of someone used to admiration. Her golden curls framed a face practiced in sweetness, yet her eyes flickered toward Eliza with unmistakable irritation. "Everyone knows the Duke will attend. The entire county will be watching." Lady Augusta nodded slowly, her attention returning to Eliza as if examining a rival at auction. "That," she murmured, "is precisely the difficulty." The silence that followed was brief but heavy, like the pause before thunder. "You see, Eliza," Lady Augusta continued, "society is easily confused by appearances. Your father's estate carries influence, and unfortunate misunderstandings might arise if a certain young lady were to attract notice that properly belongs elsewhere." Clara smiled faintly, adjusting a ribbon on her sleeve. Eliza felt the familiar tightening in her chest, yet she forced calm into her voice. "I have never wished to compete with Clara." "No," Lady Augusta said coolly. "You merely possess the inconvenient habit of doing so without trying." The word struck with the quiet precision of a knife. Lady Augusta stepped closer to the dressing table, her gaze drifting deliberately to the cascade of chestnut hair falling over Eliza's shoulders. "A pity," she said almost thoughtfully. "Men are simple creatures. They notice beauty before they notice obedience." Eliza did not yet understand the danger in that observation. The following afternoon arrived with the pale brightness of early autumn, yet the house felt strangely subdued. Servants avoided Eliza's eyes, and when she passed through the corridors their whispers seemed to scatter like startled birds. In her chamber she prepared for the evening with careful simplicity. The gown she wore was modest blue silk, chosen years ago by her late father, and she brushed her hair slowly as though savoring the quiet moment before entering the judgment of society. Then the door opened again. This time 3 servants entered behind Lady Augusta. Eliza turned in confusion. "Madam?" Lady Augusta's smile was thin and almost pleasant. "My dear child," she said, "I have reconsidered your attendance this evening." Relief flickered briefly through Eliza. "You wish me to remain home?" "Oh no," Lady Augusta replied calmly. "You shall attend." She lifted her hand. One servant stepped forward holding a chair. Another carried scissors. The meaning did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a nightmare revealing its shape. Eliza stepped back. "Madam, I do not understand." "You will," Lady Augusta said softly. The servants moved with the obedient efficiency of people who feared disobedience more than cruelty. Hands grasped Eliza's shoulders. The chair scraped across the floor. "Please," Eliza whispered, the word trembling like fragile glass. Lady Augusta watched with serene interest. "A young woman must learn humility," she said. "And humility is most convincing when it cannot be hidden beneath vanity." The first lock of chestnut hair fell to the floor with a soft, dreadful whisper. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as the scissors moved again, and again, each cut severing not merely strands of hair but the quiet pride she had guarded all her life. When it was finished, the mirror showed a stranger. Her head, nearly bare, reflected the candlelight with humiliating clarity. Lady Augusta regarded the result with cool satisfaction. "There," she said. "Now let us see which gentleman seeks a bride who resembles a penitent nun." Clara covered her mouth, half laughing. Eliza did not cry. She simply stood there, staring at the scattered chestnut strands across the floor like fallen memories. Later that evening, as the carriage lamps flickered to life outside Whitmore Manor and whispers traveled swiftly through the county, one rumor reached a distant London drawing-room where a certain duke listened with thoughtful silence. And when he finally spoke, his quiet words carried the faintest trace of intrigue. "A girl whose beauty was punished," he murmured slowly, "is often the one most worth seeing." The ballroom of Ashcroft Hall shimmered beneath 1,000 trembling lights, each crystal chandelier scattering golden reflections across polished marble floors where the aristocracy of the county gathered in anticipation of spectacle. Silk gowns whispered as women glided past one another with rehearsed elegance, while gentlemen in tailored coats discussed estates, politics, and marriages with careful interest. Yet beneath the polite murmur of conversation lay a current of curiosity sharper than any violin note drifting from the orchestra's gallery. Everyone had heard the story. The girl from Whitmore Manor. The one whose hair had been shorn away like punishment. Near the tall doors that opened toward the terrace stood Eliza Whitmore, her posture composed though her pulse trembled quietly beneath the modest blue silk of her gown. A small bonnet covered her head, its ribbon tied simply beneath her chin, but no accessory could disguise the truth society already whispered. Servants passed her without acknowledgement, and guests occasionally allowed their glances to linger too long before turning away with polite discomfort. Across the room, Lady Augusta Whitmore moved through the crowd like a general inspecting troops. Her smile gleamed with controlled confidence as she introduced her daughter Clara to every influential guest willing to listen. Clara herself seemed radiant beneath the chandeliers, her golden curls arranged in elaborate loops, her laughter rising lightly above the music. "Your daughter is quite lovely," remarked one baroness to Lady Augusta, her voice carefully measured. Lady Augusta inclined her head graciously. "Clara has always possessed remarkable grace." The baroness hesitated before lowering her voice. "And the other girl?" Lady Augusta allowed the faintest sigh to escape her lips. "My late husband's child from his first marriage. She suffers certain peculiarities of temperament. One does what one can." The explanation drifted neatly into the air, satisfying curiosity while deepening speculation. Eliza heard enough fragments of such whispers to understand their direction, yet she stood quietly beside a marble pillar, her hands folded with the dignity of someone who refused to beg kindness from those unwilling to give it. Music swelled across the hall as couples began to dance, their movements graceful beneath the candlelight. Then the great doors opened. A sudden hush spread through the ballroom like a shadow crossing sunlight. Duke Alexander Ravenshire entered without haste, his tall figure commanding attention with effortless authority. His dark coat bore no unnecessary ornament, yet his presence seemed to eclipse every jewel and embroidered sleeve surrounding him. Conversations faltered, fans paused mid-motion, and ambitious mothers subtly guided their daughters into his path. He acknowledged them all with polite indifference. Alexander's gaze moved across the room slowly, absorbing every detail with the calm patience of a man accustomed to observing before acting. Society knew him as a man of intelligence and rare restraint, someone who rarely wasted attention on frivolity. Yet tonight something held his interest. Near the pillar stood a solitary figure in blue silk, her modest bonnet marking her as the quiet subject of rumor. The Duke's eyes rested upon her. For a moment the orchestra continued to play, yet the room seemed suspended between breaths. Lady Augusta noticed the direction of his gaze and felt a flicker of unease sharpen behind her practiced smile. Alexander began walking. Not toward Clara. Not toward any of the carefully prepared introductions awaiting him. He crossed the ballroom directly toward Eliza Whitmore. Guests shifted aside instinctively, their whispers rising like wind through leaves. Eliza sensed the movement before she saw him. When she lifted her eyes, the Duke stood before her with composed gravity. The music faltered slightly as the musicians noticed the sudden stillness among their audience. Alexander bowed with deliberate courtesy. "Miss Whitmore." His voice carried neither mockery nor curiosity, only quiet acknowledgement. Eliza blinked in astonishment. "Your Grace," she managed softly. Lady Augusta felt the moment slipping beyond her control. The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box, its surface dark against the brilliance of the ballroom lights. Every nearby conversation died completely. He opened it. Inside rested a delicate silver comb, crafted with slender leaves of ivy curling along its spine. Gasps rippled outward. Alexander lifted the comb carefully as though presenting something sacred. "Hair grows again," he said calmly, his gaze steady upon Eliza's startled face. "But dignity, Miss Whitmore, must be defended when others attempt to steal it." No one moved. No one dared speak. The quiet weight of his words settled across the hall like falling snow. Eliza's fingers trembled as she accepted the comb, its cool metal pressing gently against her palm. "Your Grace," she whispered, overwhelmed, "you are most kind." Alexander's expression softened with the faintest trace of something warmer than politeness. Kindness should never be considered unusual. Across the room Clara stared in disbelief while Lady Augusta's composure hardened into rigid silence. The orchestra resumed playing hesitantly, though no couple yet dared step forward. Alexander extended his hand. "Miss Whitmore," he said with quiet confidence, "may I have the honor of the first dance?" The question struck the ballroom like thunder disguised as courtesy. No duke in living memory had opened a ball by inviting the most scandalous woman present. Eliza hesitated, aware that every eye in the room measured her answer. Her humiliation had been public. Now her dignity stood equally exposed. Slowly she placed her hand in his. And as the music swelled once more, the most sought-after duke in England led the girls' society had mocked toward the center of the floor, leaving behind a room filled with whispers that would echo far beyond that night. The orchestra gathered its breath like a living creature awakening, and within moments the first notes of the waltz unfolded across the ballroom with gentle authority. Eliza Whitmore felt the music before she fully trusted the moment unfolding around her. Duke Alexander Ravenshire's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her with a steadiness that felt both protective and disarming. Their first steps across the polished floor were cautious, yet the rhythm soon carried them forward with quiet inevitability. Around them the assembled guests watched with restrained disbelief, their whispers forming a restless tide at the edges of the room. Eliza kept her gaze lowered at first, acutely aware of the bonnet tied beneath her chin and the story hidden beneath it. The humiliation she had endured still burned faintly in her memory, like a wound that refused to cool. Yet Alexander moved beside her without the slightest hesitation, his expression composed as though dancing with her were the most natural act in the world. "You need not look at the floor, Miss Whitmore," he said gently. "It has done nothing remarkable tonight." She lifted her eyes in quiet surprise, meeting his calm gaze. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she replied. "Habit can be difficult to dismiss." "Habits formed by cruelty deserve dismissal," he answered with measured firmness. The words struck her with unexpected warmth. Their movements grew more fluid as the music deepened, the swirl of silk gowns and polished boots forming a living tapestry around them. Some couples watched openly now, curiosity overtaking restraint. Others pretended indifference, though their attention never strayed far from the unlikely pair at the center of the floor. Eliza could feel the room's judgment pressing against her shoulders like invisible weight. "You have caused quite a disturbance this evening," she said softly. Alexander's mouth curved with faint amusement. "Society often mistakes attention for disturbance. And you do not?" "I prefer truth." She studied him for a moment, searching for mockery that never appeared. "Then may I ask the truth of your intentions?" she said. The Duke considered her quietly while guiding her through another graceful turn. "My intention," he said at last, "was to ensure that injustice did not pass unnoticed." Eliza felt the words settle into her thoughts like seeds seeking light. Many men would have ignored it. Many men prefer comfort over conscience. His voice carried no arrogance, only quiet certainty. Across the ballroom Lady Augusta watched with tightening composure. Clara stood beside her, her fan moving sharply through the air as irritation replaced disbelief. "This is absurd," Clara whispered. "He cannot possibly mean to encourage her." Lady Augusta's smile remained carefully composed. "Men sometimes enjoy temporary curiosities," she replied. "One must allow them the illusion." Yet even she felt unease creeping beneath her confidence. At the center of the ballroom the music slowed slightly, drawing Eliza and Alexander closer for a brief moment of stillness within the dance. "You should not risk your reputation for my sake," Eliza murmured. "My reputation is durable," he replied. "And mine is not." Alexander regarded her with thoughtful intensity. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "reputation built upon cruelty deserves collapse." His words stirred something within her that had long remained silent. Before she could reply, the music reached its final sweeping phrase, and the dance concluded with graceful bows. Applause drifted politely across the room, though it carried a strange tension, as if the audience remained uncertain whether they had witnessed elegance or rebellion. Alexander escorted Eliza toward the tall glass doors leading to the terrace. "Fresh air would be welcome," he said softly. She nodded gratefully. Outside, the garden lay bathed in moonlight, its pathways silver beneath the quiet sky. Lanterns hung from wrought iron hooks along the hedges, casting gentle pools of light that swayed slightly in the evening breeze. The distant murmur of the ballroom faded as the doors closed behind them. Eliza removed her gloves slowly, letting the cool night air steady her thoughts. "I should thank you," she said after a moment. "You have shown me kindness when I expected only ridicule." Alexander walked beside her along the gravel path, his hands folded behind his back with thoughtful ease. "Kindness," he said, "is simply justice applied with compassion." She glanced toward him. "Most people prefer convenience. Most people fear discomfort." The honesty of the remark made her smile faintly. They paused near a rose arbor where pale blossoms glowed softly beneath the lantern light. "You know what they say about me now," Eliza said quietly. "I know what they say about everyone," he replied. "Society thrives on speculation." "But you listened." Alexander studied her face carefully. "I observe," he corrected. "And what have you observed, Your Grace?" "That you endure humiliation with more dignity than most endure praise." The statement left her momentarily speechless. For the first time that evening she felt seen not as scandal, but as a person. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why should that interest you?" The Duke's expression grew more reflective. "Because character," he said slowly, "reveals itself most clearly when stripped of comfort." Eliza felt the echo of his words against the memory of falling hair and cold laughter. A faint breeze stirred the lantern flames. "I fear my comfort has been thoroughly removed," she said. Alexander's voice softened. "And yet you remain standing." Silence lingered between them, warm rather than awkward. From the ballroom came distant music as the next dance began. Eliza looked toward the glowing windows of Ashcroft Hall. "I should return before my stepmother decides I have wandered too far." Alexander inclined his head slightly. "Miss Whitmore." She paused. "I would like to call upon you," he said with quiet certainty. The words hovered between them like the opening note of an unseen melody. Eliza felt her pulse quicken as she turned to face him fully. "A call?" she repeated softly. "Yes." The garden lanterns flickered gently in the breeze. And in that fragile moment between doubt and hope, Eliza realized the Duke's interest might not be a passing curiosity at all. Morning arrived at Whitmore Manor with a pale gray light that slipped quietly through tall windows and rested upon polished floors that seemed to remember too many arguments. The household stirred early, yet an uneasy stillness lingered beneath the routine of servants carrying trays and opening curtains. Word of the previous night had traveled swiftly through every corridor, faster than the servants dared speak it aloud. The Duke had danced with Miss Eliza Whitmore. The Duke had given her a gift. The Duke had walked with her beneath the moon. Such things were not easily contained. Eliza sat near the window of the small sitting room that had once belonged to her father, her hands folded loosely in her lap as she stared into the garden beyond the glass. The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and roses, yet her thoughts remained fixed upon the moment beneath the lanterns when Duke Alexander Ravenshire had calmly declared his intention to call upon her. The memory felt unreal, like a page torn from a novel and slipped accidentally into her life. Behind her the door opened sharply. Lady Augusta Whitmore entered without ceremony, her expression composed but her eyes blazing with restrained fury. Clara followed a step behind, her golden curls perfectly arranged despite the early hour. "So," Lady Augusta said, her voice smooth as polished marble, "the entire county speaks of nothing but your little performance last night." Eliza turned slowly from the window. "I did nothing, madam." "Precisely the difficulty," Lady Augusta replied. "You allowed others to do it for you." Clara laughed softly. "One dance and a trinket, and suddenly the servants behave as though she has conquered the ballroom." Eliza rose to her feet with quiet dignity. "The Duke asked me to dance. It would have been discourteous to refuse." Lady Augusta's smile thinned. "The Duke enjoys amusement like any gentleman. You would do well not to mistake curiosity for admiration." Eliza felt the familiar sting of humiliation but refused to lower her gaze. "I have made no assumptions." "Then allow me to make them for you," Lady Augusta said sharply. "There will be no further encounters with His Grace." The declaration struck the room with cold finality. Before Eliza could respond, The distant rumble of carriage wheels echoed across the gravel drive outside the manor. Clara moved toward the window and glanced through the curtains. Her eyes widened. "Mother," she whispered, "there is a carriage." Lady Augusta frowned slightly. "That is hardly unusual." Clara stepped aside. A black carriage bearing the Ravenshire crest stood proudly before the front steps. For the first time that morning Lady Augusta's composure faltered. Moments later the butler entered, his face carefully neutral though curiosity flickered in his eyes. "Your ladyship," he announced. "His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire." The silence that followed felt almost electric. Lady Augusta straightened her shoulders instantly, smoothing her gown as though adjusting the stage for a performance. "Of course," she said coolly. "Show him to the drawing room." The butler withdrew. Clara's voice trembled with excitement. "He has come already." Lady Augusta's gaze flickered briefly toward Eliza. "Yes," she murmured thoughtfully, "but not necessarily for the reason you imagine." The drawing room glowed with morning light when Alexander Ravenshire entered, his presence bringing with it the quiet gravity that seemed to follow him wherever he walked. He removed his gloves slowly, acknowledging Lady Augusta's greeting with formal courtesy. "Your Grace," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Whitmore Manor is honored." Alexander inclined his head politely. "Lady Augusta." Clara stepped forward quickly, offering a graceful curtsy. "How delightful to see you again, Your Grace." Alexander acknowledged her presence with a brief nod, but his gaze moved past her almost immediately. Eliza stood near the window. For a moment neither spoke. Then Alexander crossed the room with calm certainty. "Miss Whitmore." Her voice felt strangely steady despite the attention fixed upon them. "Your Grace." Lady Augusta cleared her throat lightly. "Your visit is unexpected, Your Grace. I trust everything is well?" Alexander turned toward her with composed seriousness. "I came to honor a promise." Lady Augusta's smile tightened. "A promise?" "Yes," he said simply. His attention returned to Eliza. "I wish to inquire whether Miss Whitmore would permit my continued acquaintance." The words fell into the room with the quiet force of a cannon fired politely. Clara's fan snapped shut. Lady Augusta's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "My stepdaughter," she replied smoothly, "has endured considerable excitement recently. It would be wise for her to enjoy a period of quiet reflection." Alexander regarded her calmly. "Reflection rarely requires isolation." Lady Augusta's voice hardened slightly. "I am responsible for her well-being." Alexander's expression did not change. "And I am responsible for my intentions." The tension in the room sharpened like drawn steel. Eliza watched the exchange with growing astonishment. No one had ever challenged Lady Augusta so directly within these walls. Lady Augusta folded her hands. "And what precisely are those intentions, Your Grace?" Alexander paused only a moment before answering. "I admire Miss Whitmore's character." Clara scoffed softly. "Character is rarely discussed at balls." Alexander's gaze shifted toward her briefly. "Then perhaps more people should attend them with their eyes open." The remark silenced her immediately. Lady Augusta stepped closer, lowering her voice with controlled emphasis. "My daughter Clara possesses every quality a gentleman of your standing might seek. Beauty, education, refinement." Alexander nodded politely. "I do not doubt it." Her eyes sharpened. "Then surely you understand where your attention would be most wisely directed." The room held its breath. Alexander turned back toward Eliza. "I understand perfectly." His voice remained calm, yet the certainty within it filled the room. "I intend to court Miss Whitmore." For a moment no one moved. Clara stared as though the air itself had betrayed her. Lady Augusta's composure finally cracked, anger flashing openly across her face. "That is impossible." Alexander met her gaze without hostility yet without retreat. "Nothing about it is impossible." "She will not see you again," Lady Augusta declared. Alexander's voice remained quiet. "That decision belongs to Miss Whitmore." All eyes turned toward Eliza. The sudden weight of choice settled upon her shoulders like an unexpected crown. 4 years she had obeyed silence, endured humiliation, and accepted invisibility as the safest path. Now the most powerful man in the room waited for her answer. She lifted her chin slowly. "I would welcome His Grace's visits." Lady Augusta inhaled sharply. Clara's face flushed with disbelief. Alexander's expression softened with unmistakable satisfaction. "Then I shall return soon," he said. But before he could take his leave, Lady Augusta stepped forward once more, her voice trembling with contained fury. "You may pursue this foolishness if you wish, your grace," she said coldly. "But society will not tolerate it." Alexander paused at the doorway and turned back toward her. The calm confidence in his voice carried across the room like quiet thunder. "Society," he replied, "rarely knows what it will tolerate until someone shows it." Then he left the manor, leaving behind a silence so profound that even Lady Augusta could not disguise the terrible realization settling into her thoughts. For the first time since she had taken control of Whitmore Manor, she understood that the girl she had tried to erase might soon possess something far more dangerous than beauty. She might possess a duke willing to fight for her. The weeks that followed Duke Alexander Ravenshire's visit transformed Whitmore Manor into a house suspended between dread and anticipation. Every morning the servants glanced toward the long gravel drive, half expecting the dark Ravenshire carriage to appear again, and every afternoon Lady Augusta watched the same road from the drawing-room windows with a patience sharpened by resentment. She had not believed the Duke would return. Men of rank often spoke boldly in the heat of scandal, yet they seldom allowed such declarations to survive daylight. But Alexander Ravenshire was not a man who spoke carelessly. On the third afternoon the carriage arrived. The sound of wheels upon gravel carried through the manor like a distant drum. Servants froze mid-task, and Clara hurried to the window with undisguised alarm. "He has come again," she whispered. Lady Augusta's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair, though her voice remained smooth. "Of course he has. A gentleman must complete his performance." Yet the faint tremor beneath her composure betrayed uncertainty. Alexander entered the house with the same unhurried confidence he had displayed before. He greeted Lady Augusta with formal courtesy and acknowledged Clara politely, but his attention settled upon Eliza almost immediately, as though the rest of the room existed only in soft outline around her. The change in Eliza was subtle but undeniable. Her hair, though still short, had begun to soften along her temples, and the quiet dignity she carried now possessed a steadier strength. The silver comb he had given her rested in her hand like a small emblem of defiance. "You look well, Miss Whitmore," Alexander said. "And you appear very determined, your grace," she replied gently. "I find determination useful when obstacles are persistent." Lady Augusta stepped forward before the conversation could deepen. "I trust you understand, your grace," she said crisply, "that society has taken great interest in your visits here." Alexander inclined his head. "Society always takes interest in matters it does not understand." "And what precisely is it you expect society to understand?" she asked. "That admiration need not follow convenience." Clara laughed sharply. "Admiration rarely survives ridicule." Alexander regarded her calmly. "That depends upon the courage of the admirer." Over the following days the Duke continued his visits with quiet consistency. Sometimes he walked with Eliza through the autumn gardens, where amber leaves gathered beneath their steps. Sometimes they spoke beside the library fire while Lady Augusta watched from a distance with narrowed eyes. Each conversation revealed another layer of Alexander's character. His thoughtful intelligence, his dry humor, his rare ability to listen without interruption. Eliza found herself speaking more freely than she ever had within those walls. "You are aware," she told him one afternoon as they stood beneath the fading roses, "that my stepmother believes your interest a temporary amusement." Alexander studied the garden path thoughtfully. "Many people mistake persistence for amusement," he said. "And if society refuses to accept it? Then society must reconsider its judgment." Yet Lady Augusta's patience eventually shattered. The county's grand autumn assembly approached, a ball attended by nearly every influential family in the region. It was the very stage upon which reputations were confirmed or destroyed. On the morning of the event, Lady Augusta summoned Eliza to the drawing room. "You will attend tonight," she said coldly. Eliza nodded quietly. "I assumed as much. But you will not embarrass this family again." "I never intended to embarrass anyone." Lady Augusta's gaze sharpened. "The Duke will not choose you." Eliza said nothing. "He cannot," Lady Augusta continued. "His position would not survive it." Later that evening the assembly hall glowed with candlelight and music. Ladies in glittering gowns moved beneath crystal chandeliers, while gentlemen gathered in clusters to exchange observations disguised as compliments. The air buzzed with expectation, for rumors of the Ravenshire courtship had spread like wildfire through drawing rooms and carriage rides alike. Clara arrived radiant in pale gold silk, every curl arranged to perfection. Lady Augusta guided her confidently through the crowd, greeting acquaintances with controlled pride. Then the Duke entered. A hush rippled across the ballroom as Alexander Ravenshire stepped inside, his presence commanding attention with effortless gravity. Lady Augusta moved quickly to greet him. "Your Grace," she said warmly, though tension flickered beneath her smile. "You honor this gathering." Alexander bowed politely. "The honor belongs to the hosts." Clara stepped forward eagerly. "I believe we share the first dance this evening." Lady Augusta's smile widened. Several guests nearby exchanged knowing glances. The arrangement had clearly been expected. But Alexander did not extend his hand. Instead he glanced toward the far side of the ballroom. Eliza stood quietly near the tall windows, wearing a simple gown of deep blue. The silver comb glimmered faintly against the short waves of her growing hair. For a moment the entire room seemed to follow the direction of his gaze. Lady Augusta felt the shift instantly. "Your Grace," she said sharply, "the orchestra is waiting." Alexander turned back toward her with calm composure. "Indeed." Then he spoke words that fell through the ballroom like a bell struck in silence. "Yet I believe the first dance belongs elsewhere." He crossed the floor with steady confidence. Whispers erupted across the hall. Clara's face drained of color. Lady Augusta's expression hardened with fury she could no longer disguise. Alexander stopped before Eliza and bowed deeply. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. "Your Grace." "I believe society has waited long enough for clarity." The orchestra faltered uncertainly. Alexander reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet case. When he opened it, the candlelight revealed a slender ring set with a pale sapphire that glowed like captured moonlight. Gasps echoed around the room. Lady Augusta stepped forward in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Alexander's voice carried clearly across the hall. "I am entirely serious." He turned back toward Eliza and knelt before her. For a heartbeat the world seemed to pause. "You were humiliated for the sake of vanity," he said gently. "You endured cruelty with dignity, and you met ridicule with grace." His gaze held hers with unwavering warmth. "I would be honored if you would become the Duchess of Ravenshire." The silence that followed felt vast and electric. Eliza's heart pounded so fiercely she could hear it above the murmurs of the crowd. Only months ago she had stood powerless in her own chamber while her hair fell to the floor like discarded pride. Now the same society that had whispered about her waited breathlessly for her answer. She lifted her hand slowly. "Yes," she said. The word traveled through the ballroom like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Alexander rose and placed the ring upon her finger. Around them the murmurs swelled into astonished applause, though Lady Augusta remained frozen in rigid disbelief while Clara turned away in stunned humiliation. Alexander offered his arm. "Shall we dance, Your Grace?" he asked softly. Eliza smiled for the first time without hesitation. And as they stepped onto the floor together, the chandeliers blazing above them and the orchestra finally finding its courage again, the girl once shorn in cruelty moved forward not as a victim of scandal, but as the future Duchess of Ravenshire, while the whispers of society transformed at last into something far more powerful than gossip: respect.